Well, the problem of metaphysics for Aristotle is, well, he goes about it a particular way. So Aristotle was a natural scientist, as far as the physical sciences are concerned. He spent a lot of his time looking at empirical data and starting from there. So if he were out here, he spent a lot of time looking at the quality of the trees, what makes, how the trees exist, in what way, how that's different from the ground. And the sky, he'd probably spend lots of time observing the changes in the environment to see what kind of effects that it had. So that was the study of particular things. So if you remember with Plato, that wasn't what was important at all. Plato didn't think that there was any real knowledge to be had with the particular things. It was important to abstract your way up in the hierarchy of being, this hierarchy of the forms to get to the top form. Aristotle was a bit different. Right? Aristotle thought that, well, these were the things that existed. These particular things all around us. That tree, well, you can't see that tree because it's out of the camera shot, but that tree over there is what exists. This tree over here is what exists. That's the starting point. And by the way, that's the thing that exists. He rejected Plato's idea that what was more real than these trees was the form of tree. So now Aristotle thought, no. What's more real is that tree. I can touch it. I can interact with it. I can see it. I can taste it. I can smell it. I can hear it. So these are the real things for Aristotle. It's these particular things around us. So the sciences were a good kind of knowledge for Aristotle. They were important kind of knowledge. You had to start understanding these particular things through the physical sciences. Okay, through empirical data is what's going to be really important for Aristotle. But that's not the end of the story. Right? While there is this huge metaphysical difference between Plato and Aristotle, they still seem to follow the same epistemic lines, epistemology being the study of knowledge. They both thought that you had to start with empirical data and move on from there. They both thought that there were universal truths. They couldn't see how there could be any kind of truth without universal truths. If we're talking about trees, we're talking about the universal of trees. And yeah, you start to understand, for both of them, you start to understand the universal tree with empirical data. And for both of them, you start working your way up in abstraction. Plato thought the most real thing were the abstracts. Aristotle said, no, these are the most real thing. So for Aristotle, there's still the problem of metaphysics. The sciences don't solve the problem of metaphysics. They don't solve the problem what's really real. It's a start, but it's not the end. All right, the physical sciences, the particular sciences, are sciences of the particular objects. Okay, it's how this object exists in relation to the other objects and the causal relations between them. So this tree is related to the ground, is related to the air, is related to the water. Well, there's no water here right now, but if there were, it'd be related to it. And how these things interact give us these causal relations that give us understanding of these things. However, there's still the more general question of being itself. All these things are. All these things exist. So if we're going to understand being, well, we got to start looking around at the things that exist. So the particular sciences, or the physical sciences, try to answer the question of what is this particular thing and how does it exist in relation to other particular things. The problem of metaphysics tries to ask the questions of, tries to figure out questions about what is real, right? What is existence? What is being? So still moving higher up in hierarchy, but Aristotle says we must always remain grounded with these particular things. Also kind of in contrast to Plato, Plato thought that the higher up you went in hierarchy, the better you understood the things below. So, in theory, you could with Plato's idea, you start with just a small group of things and you work your way up the hierarchy, and then everything else. Aristotle would disagree, say no, you still have to know the particular things. You might know being, okay, but that doesn't give you full and complete knowledge of everything else in the down below. So yeah, for Aristotle, this problem of metaphysics is the problem of being, is the question of being. What does it mean to exist? And what he wanted to find are the causes and principle of being. Right? Now, causes, don't think just merely causation in the physical science sense. We'll get into that with the next section. But, what explains being? What explains existence? Right? That's maybe another way of thinking about it. And the principles are those things that, bring about the way that things are as they are. Right? So that, in a nutshell, is the problem of metaphysics for Aristotle. So Aristotle has his own terminology for the things that exist, and you can think of it as ways of understanding being, okay? Now remember, for Aristotle, there's still universals, all right? Now we'll get exactly to how to understand universals in a little bit, but there are universals and there are particular things, okay? The particular things are the substances, all right? And I'll get to substance in a little bit. Now, substances not only exist, but they exist in different ways. Okay, so I'm a substance, my hat is a substance, my sunglasses are a substance, this tree over here is a substance, the rocks in the background over there, those are substances. Now, we all exist, but we exist in different ways. Right? And the different ways that we exist are properties. All right? So, you can think of properties as adjectives or verbs, right? And substances would be the nouns in our language. So, properties, like I said, are the ways that things that exist, right? And a way to start understanding properties is to start with sensory information. So, color, I'm seeing a lot of green out here, right? If I were to rub my hand on that tree, I'd feel rough, right, and abrasive, all right? The rocks beneath my feet that I'm standing on, they're hard, they're dense. If I were to touch them, they'd probably be a little bit cool, too. The air has a certain temperature. It's very comfortable right now, the air is. There's light coming off from this direction. These are all properties. These are all, we can start with just all these sensory qualities, okay? But there are more properties than just sensations, okay? So, for instance, there's quantity, right? And this is just the way that substances could be measured, right? So all the trees around me have a certain height, right? Each one has its own height. Everything around me has a certain weight, right? And these are ways that we could quantify things, and that's number. Even the number of branches that a tree has, that's also a quantity, okay? There's relation. A relation, is maybe a way of saying is a way to describe two things and how they exist and compared to one another. Okay, so this tree behind me, right? I'm standing in front of this tree, I'm standing in front of this tree, and this tree is behind me. So in front of and behind are relations. They're talking about distance, or as I talk about spatial location. Speaking of location, that's another property. I am in Friedrich Wilderness Park. That's a location, which is in San Antonio, which is a location, which is in Texas, which is a location. In North America, in the Northern Hemisphere, on planet Earth, in the solar system, so on and so forth. Right. These are all ways to describe substances. So they are all properties. All right? Now, for a memory mention image or property, I think of somebody standing at a chalkboard and writing like a really proper letter T, right? So maybe it's in cursive, right? So a very proper letter T. Proper T for property. Now, some of the properties that I have can change without changing the kind of thing that I am. Okay, so right now I'm wearing a hat. Right? Well, I can take the hat off, and I'm still me. I'm still the kind of thing that I am. I have brown hair. I can dye my hair blonde, and I would still be me. Okay, I can shave off my beard. I have shaved off my beard many times, and I am still me. Although a lot of people don't recognize me as me, but that's another story. So these properties that can change are accidental properties. And these are the properties, these are the descriptions, these are the ways of being of a substance that can change without changing the kind of thing it is. Okay? For a memory mentioned image of accidental property, I think of a car door, or really any piece of metal, and somebody taking an axe and denting in a proper T with the axe. Right? So they're making that T in a cursive, but they're doing it with an axe. So axe, dent, proper T for accidental property. There are some properties that cannot change, right? That cannot change and still be the kind of thing that it is. There's a whole collection of properties around me that can't change without changing the kind of thing that I am. The fact that I'm warm-blooded, right? The fact that I have skin, the property of having skin. The property of, the particulars of how my digestion works, my, metabolism works, right? So these trees have a different kind of property as far as that's concerned than I do, right? Trees don't have skin. Right? If you start seeing, things coming out of the ground with leaves on them that have skin, you are dreaming or on an alien planet, right? So, those are properties that can't change without changing the kind of thing I am. The fact that I am breathing, right? If I stop breathing, I'm no longer the kind of thing that I am. Namely, I'm dead. I'm no longer living, right? So, these properties that can't change are what are called essential properties. Okay, essential properties. And these are ways of being that cannot change and still have the same kind of thing. Okay. For a memory mentioned image of essential properties, I think of, again, somebody making a proper T, maybe in cursive or something like that, but they're using pennies, right? Essential or cent proper T, essential properties. Now, these properties are abstracts, okay? They are the ways that things exist, yes, but these are the things that are understood. These are the things that are taken into the mind. All right. Now, remember, for Aristotle, each particular thing is real, right? And its universals do not exist separately from the particular thing. So whereas, Plato would say, for instance, we measure the height, the quantity of the trees. Plato would say that quantity exists somewhere else, right? And it's a real, separately existing thing that exists independently of the trees. The trees depend upon it, upon the universals for their existence. Aristotle's back is the other way, right? Aristotle says, no, the universals, the properties are in the thing, okay? I cannot take the color of that tree and kind of rip it out and hold it in my hands. And I can't do that. I can't take the color from my shirt and take it off and hold it in my hands. Right? But whiteness, the color of my shirt, whiteness does not exist as a form. Whiteness exists right here. Now, what is responsible for the properties that you have is called an essential nature. Now, essential nature is not essential properties, right? The essential properties are the descriptions that cannot change and still have the kind of thing it is. The essential nature is what is responsible for the properties that you have. And I think it's fair to say that it's responsible not only for the essential properties, but also for the accidental properties as well. There are properties that can change about me and still be the kind of thing that I am, but there's limits. Right? So I can change, I can change my clothing and still be me. I can lose a certain amount of weight. I can gain a certain amount of weight and still be me. But it's within limits, right? You get too light and I die and I cease to exist. You get too heavy and I die and I cease to exist, right? I can move myself at various speeds. I can walk, I can run, I can stand still. Right? The movement, the rate of movement can change and still be me. But there's limits, right? I cannot run the 6-minute mile. Other people can, I cannot. So I think this essential nature is what's responsible for the properties that I have. Okay. Now, again, the essential nature is not a universal floating out there. The essential nature is right in here. It's me, or it's in me. All right. It's not an abstract that's separately existing. It's that within me that's causing the properties that I have. So we have properties, accidental, and essential. And we have an essential nature. And for a memory mansion image of essential nature, think of a tree, which is always my handy image for nature, a tree but made out of pennies. So you can have them stacked up or whatever you like, right? You have a tree made out of pennies, or even a tree that instead of growing leaves is growing pennies, whatever you like. So essential nature, right? So we have properties, accidental and essential. We have an essential nature. Now, properties are not all that there is, right? Remember, I can't take the properties off of me and kind of hold it in my hand. Now, for Aristotle, this means that there's something that is underlying the properties. There's something which the properties reside in. Okay? We can even say that this thing is responsible for the properties that we have. And that is substance. Substance underlies the properties. Substance is what the properties reside in. Properties cannot separately exist from the substance. Now, we don't want to say, and be careful, we don't want to say that substance can exist separately from the properties. That would be a little mistaken. Now, the causal direction is from the substance to the properties. Okay, right. But to say that the substance can exist without the properties is to say that a cause exists without effects. That doesn't make sense, right? In virtue of what a cause is, it has to have an effect. So, substance has properties. Or another way of saying this is substance has a way of being. Right? These are what properties are, a way of being. If you say that something doesn't have a way of being, it doesn't exist. Right? If it doesn't have a way of being, it doesn't exist. Similarly, ways of being can't exist without something to exist in. Right? The ways of being are properties. The being that is, that's the substance. Okay. So all of what you see around you are substances. What you see are the ways of being of that substance. What the substance is that thing that exists and is responsible for the properties. By the way, I almost forgot, for a memory mansion image of substance, I think of a submarine with a pair of legs that's standing. Right? Sub standing for substance. So we've dealt with properties, we've dealt with substance. Right? We have accidental and essential properties. We have the substance. We also have, that deals with, the properties and the substances. But we also have an essence. Okay. Now, an essence is not the essential nature. Right? The essence I think we might think of it as the definition of a thing. Okay. Now remember, the definition is going to be the universal, and the universals for these things do not exist separately from these things. So the essence of this tree is found here. It's found here. For essence, you could think of pennies in the shape of an S, right? Pennies in the shape of an S. That might do it for you. So we have the substance and the properties, and that's that. So remember, Aristotle doesn't want to give up on universals totally, right? He wants to keep universals because we've got to have some way of talking about the truth. When I start talking about trees, and that trees use water and air and earth to energize, to metabolize, I want to say something true. If there is no universal tree, I can't do that. Heck, if there's no universal metabolizes, I can't do that. If I can only talk about particular things, actually I can't do very much at all. Even our sensory information is generalized. Right? Well, Aristotle still keeps universals. He even keeps the word form. And he keeps the word matter. For Aristotle, there is form and there is matter. Now, the form of tree, again, is found here. And we can think of this as, the properties of the tree. Not only the essential properties, but the accidental properties as well. That's going to be the form. All right? It's how we describe it. It's how we understand the ways of being for this tree. Okay. Then there's also matter. Right? And matter we can roughly think of as what a thing is made of. Right? So in my case, I'm made of flesh and bone, which has certain minerals, certain chemicals, mostly water, overwhelmingly water. But I'm not just, don't think of matter merely as physical stuff. I am also what makes me, me, are my experiences. Now, experiences are like the past. They're intangible. You can't touch the past at all. I mean, I was over there, what was the clock say, about 3 minutes ago. But I can't go back over there and see, and actually interact with myself in the past. Right? Experiences are the same way. Experiences definitely leave a mark on you, right? Especially in terms of memory and emotional impact. But experiences are in the past. They are no longer present. So, in a very real way, experiences are not tangible. My beliefs are part of the matter of me. And also my willpower. Right? That willpower is also the matter of me. Even the essential nature. And we're reaching an interesting problem here, whether an essential nature is going to be matter or not. That's an interesting question. But essential nature probably is not going to be physical. Right? You might say, wait, what about DNA? Well, DNA is important, sure. And DNA's going to determine a lot of things about me. But there's something that determines DNA. Right? The essential nature is what's going to determine my DNA. So yeah, the matter is what I'm made of. In my case, flesh, bone, experiences, blood, water. You can also think of matter as, how to phrase this? Well, actually, let's not get into that. So just matter is just what the thing is made of. The form is the kind of thing that it is. Or, where matter is what I'm made of, form is what I'm made to be. And so I'm human. Okay. Now form, it's got a close parallel between form and essence and essential nature. I mean, there's some overlap between these different concepts, but we don't want to confuse them. Remember, essential nature is what's responsible for making me the kind of thing it is. The essence is the definition of the thing. And the form is, the kind of thing that I am. There's actually, it may not be a terrific difference between form and essence. Right? It may not be a terrific difference between form and essence. Now, we're not exactly dealing with Plato and Pythagoras anymore. right? Both of those guys thought that the form is not material, and form is not material, right? But Pythagoras and Plato thought that the form was responsible for the thing that you are, make you the kind of thing that you are, right? It's not going to be the case for Aristotle. If anything, it's going to be the essential nature, right? That's going to make you the kind of thing you are. And essential nature is going to be particular. It's in here. It's me. It's in me. The form is, in a sense, still me, but the form would be the definition of me, right? How you understand me. So that's the big difference between form and matter. Matter is what I'm made of. Form is what I'm made to be. Now, for Aristotle, there is no such thing as form without matter. Right? This is a rejection of Plato. Plato thought that form could exist without matter. Not so for Aristotle. Also for Aristotle, there's no such thing as matter without form. Right? Everything has a definition. Everything has a way to be. Okay? Remember, if you take away the way a thing is, that thing doesn't exist. Right? So if you take away form, that thing doesn't exist. It certainly doesn't exist as the kind of thing it is. So, you might try to say that, you might try to get down to the simplest part of matter and say, ha, that's matter without form. Say, no. Because, what do we say? And string theory was one. Well, string is a form. Quarks is another one. Quark is a form, right? It's a way the thing is. You might ask yourself for class, because I'm likely to ask the question, who in the history of philosophy, who we've already studied so far, thinks that there's matter without form? And what do they call it? Right? There's at least, there's one really big example, and probably two. Right? So we have form and matter. Now, for a memory mansion image of form, I think of foam, right? Like styrofoam, specifically because foam could be made into different forms, different shapes, right? For matter, I usually think of a mat, like a floor mat, right? So mat for matter and foam for form. So Aristotle is very different from Plato. Right? They both kind of sort of start the same way as far as knowing things around us, right? They both start with empirical data. Even for Plato, you got to start with the appearances to get to the form. Now, Plato thought that once you started to get beyond appearances, you could start just through mere contemplation, specifically understand math, right? And you understand those higher forms. And he thought that you could understand being that way through contemplation. You can find the definition of being, or this highest form. Aristotle's different, right? For Aristotle, it's important to know abstraction as well. Sure, that's the project of metaphysics, to know what being is, its principles and its causes. But you got to start with these things. Right? You got to start here. You got to start with the empirical data, and the empirical data is important. You're still doing abstraction, but the empirical data is important. And by the way, the most real thing for Aristotle is not the form, is not the universal. It's that thing right there. So, what we get from empirical data, that's the properties. Right? The properties are caused by substance. Right? Or properties are what adhere in substance. You cannot have a property without a substance. You also can't have a substance without a property. Properties are the way things are, the way it exists. If you don't have a way that something exists, you don't have anything at all. Similarly, if you don't have anything at all, there's no way that it exists. The way that it exists, property. The thing that is, substance. Right? Now, for properties, we have accidental properties, things that can exist that don't change the kind of thing it is. And we have essential properties. Now, these are the properties that cannot change without changing the kind of thing it is. You have an essential nature. Right? Essential nature is not a universal. It's that which causes, the way that something is. Right? We might even put these three together. The way things are, that's a property. The thing that is, that's a substance. The what causes it to be the kind of thing it is, that's the essential nature. But there's lots of ways to start thinking about that, and as the history of philosophy shows. But we might start divvying it up that way. In addition to these three, the thing, the way the thing is, and the essential nature. So the thing is the substance, the way the thing is the properties, the essential nature is what causes the kind of thing that it is. You also have the essence, and we think of the essence as the definition of a thing, which you're going to find in all of your biology textbooks when you start talking about different kinds of animals. Same thing with different kinds of plants. What you're going to find even with physics when you start looking at quarks, right? These are going to be the essences of these things, the definitions of these things, right? And even what we may call just merely man-made things like art, right? There's an essence for art. There's an essence for some of the artifacts that we make. Some, like for instance, we could just broadly put artifacts into two categories, right? Artifacts that are used to make other artifacts, and then everything else. Right? So one is called tools, and the other one is product. Right? So the essence is the definition of the thing. Aristotle also makes this distinction between form and matter. Right? Matter is what a thing is made of. I am flesh and blood. I'm chemicals. I'm water. I'm made of these things. That's my matter. There's also form. Form is the kind of thing it is, what it's made to be. Right? There's probably not a great deal of difference between essence and form. Probably not. It's hard to tell with some of Aristotle's writings. It's hard to tell in this book, actually, what the big difference is going to be between essence and form. Okay. Now, for Aristotle, everything, every substance is a composite of form and matter. Right? It is a composite for form and matter. You cannot have matter without form. You cannot have form without matter. Plato thought you could have form without matter. That's his whole theory of the universals to begin with. That's the whole theory of forms to begin with. That the form is a separately existing thing. There is no matter for these. Aristotle says no. You got to have both. Somebody else, and we'll guess who in class, thought you could have matter without form. At least one main person, and maybe two. So that's how Aristotle breaks things down. He's still interested in the same project, so to speak, of what Plato is interested in. They're still interested in being and trying to answer the questions of being. Right? But Aristotle is not as quick to dismiss the particular things. You still have to know the particular things if you can understand being. They're both interested in generality. Yeah, don't think that Aristotle is not interested in generalities, not interested in universals. He is. He is. So that's going to give us a start to Aristotle's metaphysics. And I'm going to ask you some questions in class, which will be nice and fun and twist your brain around. So I'll see you then.